Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. You're Debra. Debra, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Sure. Hi, my name is Debra Bezzina. I work at the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute, and I'm the managing director for the Center for Connected and Automated Transportation, which is a Region 5 university transportation center from USDOT.
Now, what exactly does this research center do?
Oh boy. So we conduct research in the area of connected and automated transportation. So that includes vehicles and infrastructure and everything in between. We have a consortium. So it's not just the University of Michigan, it's Purdue, University of Akron, Central State University, which is an HBCU in Ohio, Washtenaw Community College, which is right around the corner from our university, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And so collectively, we conduct about $2.8 million of research annually in the area of connected and automated transportation.
Could you explain a little bit about what connected automation is?
Sure. So when we talk about connected, let's start with there. We're not talking about vehicles that are connected to the internet. We're talking about vehicles that are using a specific communication protocol that was developed for vehicles to talk to each other, vehicles to talk to the infrastructure, so B2V, B2I, and vehicles to talk to pedestrians and bicyclists and really anything else, so B2X. So that's the connected portion. And then automated is, driverless cars, basically. So we like to view it as, instead of autonomous, which is what you see a lot of in the newspaper, is that we're talking about connected and automated. And so we think to get a commercially viable product that's as safe as a car is today on the road, is you need that little connectivity piece. It gives an autonomous vehicle much more, it can recognize the environment much more readily, like a human can. So it just gets you one step closer to being commercially viable.
So when we say connected, though, like how is it able to connect with a pedestrian? How is it able to connect with another car? Because my always thing when I bring up with like autonomous vehicles, or an issue that I have, is like sensing like a drunk driver or sensing some type of anomaly that's happening. Like if there's a weather scenario, like we can take account that the AI will be able to, understand a little bit easier on like slippery roads or things of that sort. But also there's like black ice. There's issues that we have today where even human capacity is not able to even master that.
Sure. So connectivity, again, it's a communication protocol. And so a connected vehicle is broadcasting a basic safety message every 10 milliseconds. So it's saying, this is my position, this is my heading, this is my predicted path. I'm a sedan, I'm this wide, I'm this long, and that all that information is much more richer data set than what you get with just any single sensor. And so other vehicles that are connected will receive that information, and they can do a threat assessment, such as what you have on the market today that's used by radar, something as simple as forward collision warning. So if you're getting too close to a vehicle and you're about to hit it, you're going to get a warning. But it can do other things that you can't really do with just the sensors that are available today. And a lot of that has to do with being connected to the infrastructure. So the infrastructure can also send out messages, such as there's ice on the road, or you have a red light, or you have a green light that's about to turn red. So you can do things like red light violation warning. So if you're approaching a light and the driver's not really paying attention, that it can get a warning from its onboard unit to say, hey, that light's about to turn red. Um, so there's a lot of benefit out of being just connected.
How does it able to predict if a light's about to turn red though? So that would be connected to a network, or would it have some type of sensor capabilities that are picking up a frequency that
No, it's connected to the traffic signal controller. So the signal controller is sending that information to the roadside unit. And so the roadside unit broadcasts a message, which is called SPAT, signal phase and timing. So it sends out the state of the signal, which is red, yellow, green, the phase, which is actually the lane, because I was not a traffic engineer, so I didn't understand that. So each intersection, each lane has a number. So it can have, let's say, 12 different phases. So one's like the through lane, one's the turn lane, the right turn lane, left turn lane, etc. And it goes all around to each piece of the intersection. And then the timing is sort of a countdown. So it's I'm green for lane 3 for another 10 seconds. And so that's really the information that's coming from the traffic signal controller to the roadside unit. They broadcast SPAT, and all the vehicles that are connected can hear it and do an assessment with that. It's also good for things like green waving, where you can use that information and you can use it on a corridor. And so basically the driver will get a message from its onboard unit to say, hey, if you go 35 miles an hour, you're going to make every light in this corridor. So it saves on gas, saves on, reduces the carbon footprint. So it's more than just safety. It's good for mobility, handling congestion, and it's good for sustainability. So improvements to the environment.
and when we talk about pedestrians, so if it's interacting with pedestrian, like would you create something like I say if someone's riding a bike, would you just make something that would be able to like be like how a bike light is, where you can show you that there's something there or a person that's riding a bike on a road, or is it connected to another way?
So there's a few ways to do pedestrian detection, and one is that the pedestrian has a small device that's doing the same thing as the onboard unit on a vehicle. So it's broadcasting its position, the either the bicyclist or the pedestrian's position, etc. Or you can use what we've done in Ann Arbor is we have a grid smart camera at select intersections. They're actually mid-block crosswalks because we get a lot of pedestrian traffic from students. And so at these mid-block crosswalks, the camera system will detect the pedestrian. That information is sent to the roadside unit, and then the roadside unit broadcasts, instead of a SPAT message, it'll broadcast a personal safety message, a PSM. And that's just really means it's either a bicyclist or a pedestrian or something that's not a vehicle, right? And so then that information is sent to the onboard unit, and the onboard unit, again, in our case, will either say, hey, watch out, there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk, or it'll say, hey, you need to stop or you're going to hit the pedestrian in the crosswalk. So it's two levels. One is sort of an informational, and then the other one is definitely a warning.
Now, is this something that's got to learn on its own? Not like I guess maybe the more experience or the more that it's implemented, it's going to end up being like a database where more information is going to be consumed up into it.
It's done real time rather than you look in a database. So it's the the camera system though does use AI to learn what a pedestrian is. But I don't think that's traditionally stored in a database for people to look at and grab, if you know what I mean.
Well, I would take an account for like black ice or something like that. Like even with like our information that we have on black ice, I mean, as much as we say like we understand what it really is, we don't necessarily know what conditions that would be more frequent to black ice. We know like certain weather conditions, but certain areas, for instance, like case to case basis. Obviously, certain states have different conditions, so you'd have to think that wouldn't that information be stored on like a database, or maybe like are these things like able to scan their environment as much as they're able to scan their environment, be able to predict things that happen in real time. They can store some of that information somewhere in case like traffic, for instance, if you want to go to, I don't know, like if I want to go over 90 bridge or something like that. It's one of the bridges we have here to get into town. You can look up a traffic cam. It'll show you, oh, the bridge is red right now. That means that traffic is very, very high. So are you having situations like that where you're having something that's able to send or record data for other cars? It would just be beneficial if everyone's using a connected car in a sense.
Yeah, so the roadside unit system is typically connected to, let's say, the cloud, and so that information can be used. However, the city basically owns. Well, I must not say own it, but the city is the one who's using it for things like that. But what we do for weather type incidents is two ways. One is that in Ann Arbor we've embedded sensors in the pavement, and they take temperature and humidity readings, and then they infer when there's ice on the road. And then the roadside unit will broadcast a traveler information message, so a TIM, to say, hey, there's ice on the road in this location. And then the onboard unit can react to that to give the driver an ice warning if they're, about to drive over that patch of ice. Or because the vehicles are all connected to a roadside unit, if their traction control events are going off in a specific area, that can be used by the back office to be detecting the black ice on the road. And so that can be also given to the drivers. And the beauty of being connected, the roadside units being connected by the city to their traffic control management center, is that they can warn the drivers miles ahead of time. So they can have the other RSUs being able to warn drivers that, hey, there's this ice ahead, and not like immediately ahead of you, but we're talking, a mile ahead of you. And that's really interesting when you start talking about accidents in bad weather. So a few years ago in Michigan, we had a 96 car pileup on I-94. And, it was blustery conditions. You couldn't see anything. It was 0 degrees outside. And one car just kept hitting into the other car, hitting into the other car. And traditional sensors couldn't pick it up in time. And so by the time they needed to stop, it was too late, that they were just going to be sliding on top of that ice and snow. So with an RSU system, once that's detected, it can be given to drivers miles behind. And so instead of being a 96 car pileup, that could have been avoided.
When we talk about like what happens if this car, like if it does hit ice and it does start to kind of lose control, usually a lot of times, a lot of issues is that people, when they start losing control of their car, they either do too many quick adjustments or they do something and they end up getting caused and or taken off the road or something like that. Would this car be able to not necessarily predict it, but be able to, when a situation does arise, be able to do some type of measure that would cause it to maybe get it right back on track, or at least slow down to a point where it wouldn't cause an accident?
Yes, if it's automated, yes. And so that's again where you want a connected automated vehicle. Connected vehicles just standalone are a really good start, but a connected and automated vehicle is kind of like the whole package. And an autonomous vehicle probably wouldn't have been able to detect the ice.
And this would be easier to start like in cities where there's a lot of infrastructure already. It would probably be harder out like in the country or maybe secluded areas to incorporate, because not just talking about the car, you're also talking about kind of the environment a little bit as well too. Installing sensors, not necessarily in a stop sign, but just in the pavement and things that we can use already that we have.
Well, personally, I would like to see these deployments in rural areas, not just in the city, because it can really benefit them as well. And I think typically rural areas are underserved, especially when it comes to infrastructure. And, I was just up north, I'm from Michigan. So, I go up north, beautiful country, a lot of rural. And there's a lot of roads where the speed limit's 55. It's a 2-lane road. And then there's a crossroad, and the crossroad just has a stop sign. A lot of them are windy, so it's really hard to get a good, clear view of what's coming. And plus, they're coming so fast, so it's a little scary. And at intersections like that, they're small, but it can really benefit a lot. Connected vehicles could benefit. It doesn't need any infrastructure in that area because it would be able to hear if a vehicle, I'm saying here, hear a vehicle coming, it would hear the broadcast from that vehicle. But then you do have the infrastructure that you could offer as well, to even step it up one level. But I would personally like to see more deployments in rural areas.
Could you get like imagine a place like you come to a crossroads or something, or a four-way stop in the middle of the country where there's nothing but fields. Now, could you have like this thing, like this signal type thing, be set up as maybe it has a large radius, so you don't need to incorporate like this giant tower, but you have something that looks like a sign. I mean, with the more that we talk about smart cities and smart technology, in a sense, they find better ways to hide it from the public, much like our Wi-Fi towers now look like trees. People sometimes don't even know if they're cutting down a tree or if they're cutting down a Wi-Fi tower. So I go, if you look at the giant examination of like a giant country landscape, instead of messing with the environment and building a giant tower, you could just have something where the technology is so good it's able to transmit 100 miles, 50 miles or something, and then set up another one down the road, but it's so discreet you wouldn't even be able to tell it was a sensor.
Yeah, so roadside units are typically small. They're, maybe a foot by a foot, a couple inches deep, have few antennas on them. They can't be mounted above 25 feet, just an FCC/FAA ruling. And they transmit at least 300 meters. We've seen it in our environment that they go over a mile with really good accuracy. So if you had a network, you'd only have to put them, if it's straight away, you wouldn't have to put them that far, but every 300 meters is pretty far away. And then have them connected together to form a network that goes to some cloud or back office at a municipality.
Now, is your goal to have it implemented in cars first, or do you think on maybe starting somewhere else or taking it even farther than that?
I think it has to be a combination, because so you can't turn over the entire fleet of vehicles all at once, right? So there's what, 250 million vehicles in the fleet. I'm going to call it a fleet, but it's vehicles on the road today. And there's only between 12 and 16 or 17 million that come out every year. And so it's going to take a long time to roll over that fleet and make them all connected. Fortunately, you can do an aftermarket solution, but to get new production vehicles, even with aftermarket, it's just going to take some time. So to provide the people that have adopted it early, infrastructure gives them day one benefit. So they do get benefit by interacting with the infrastructure, because it can make it seem like all the vehicles are connected. And by that, I mean, it can scan the environment and generate the equivalent of a basic safety message for all the vehicles in that intersection. And so if there was only one vehicle that was connected, it would seem to that vehicle that all of the vehicles were connected. And in that sense, it makes, at a minimum, these intersections safer.
See, what I found about this is really interesting to me is that when I talked to someone about autonomous vehicles, and he was talking about like 2050, 2070, there would be like it would be fully autonomous. All vehicles would be fully autonomous. And when I found this connected cars, I kind of I think everyone knows the fear of being in a group of cars on a highway or on something like that. We're going 70 miles an hour. There's a car right in front of you. There's a car right behind you. I'm like right up on your bumper, car right beside you. I get an anxiety attack. I start going, oh my God, I don't want to be here. And that's always the worst spot to be because someone makes a mistake and then it's everybody that's kind of suffering in a sense. And this would this be it's a more effective way of doing it. You have smart technology that's able to not only work in tandem, but also be able to predict things that where a human error kind of falls in.
That's true. And connectivity and um, automation or automated vehicles, they work in tandem. And NHTSA is touting that for platooning, if you make them connected, that you can actually decrease the headway, which is important. People think when they view like truck platooning that they're really bumper to bumper, and that's not really the case. They're pretty far apart. And the scary part is they're worried about people like cutting in between the trucks that are doing the platooning. So this way, if you use connected vehicles, that you can decrease that headway enough. But when you like what you're saying, when you're in this anxiety, the connectivity gives you a 360 view around your vehicle. So it's hearing the vehicle that's in front of you, on your sides of you, and back of you. And it can really help. And then, the driver can get warnings, or if you have a connected and automated vehicle, the vehicle itself will take action if needed. Because I do too. I get really stressed out on the freeway. And it's not because of my driving, it's because of other people's driving, right? That's what everyone says. I'm a good driver. I worry about the others, but I make mistakes too. Like I'll cut someone off by accident because I don't really see them in my blind spot, even though I have a blind spot detection system on my car or something like that, or I get cut off all the time. And it is scary. Because especially when you're going at 70 miles an hour, that's what kills. Speed kills, from an old saying, but that's true. The higher the speed, usually the more severe the accident.
Have you thought about with the connected cars, like what happens if an anomaly happens, like someone gets a flat tire or someone gets a blowout on the road? Is there like a install system or something where it knows to pull immediately over as safe as it possibly can?
That's a little bit out of my area of expertise, and I'm assuming you're talking about like an automated vehicle. Would the automated vehicle be able to detect it? And I know that there's a lot of research being done on two things. One, when do you tell the driver it needs to take over, which is what you're talking about, and then two, how do you portray it to a driver that they need to take over?
Yeah.
I don't have the answers to either of those, but
What about like when we talk about like connected vehicles, could we bring it into the area of large transportation? Like we talk about train systems. I mean, a lot of them, they can kind of be automated in a sense as well too. Really, you don't need a whole lot of driver interaction, but you would make transportation not only safer, but you would make transportation easier and faster and probably more effective in the means as well too.
yeah. So when you talk about trains, I always been trying to get connectivity on trains for a while, because in Ann Arbor, and I'm sure a lot of other places, there's what they call at grade railroad crossings, where it just has a light, but it doesn't have like a overpass or anything for the train to go on, that's where you have the accidents with vehicles. So if they were both connected, the vehicle would hear, hey, there's a train coming, right? Which would make it safer um, in and of itself. But if you want to make things more, let's see, efficient, we offer things like transit signal priority. So that's if there's a bus coming and you know that, hey, the bus is either behind schedule or has a lot of passengers on it, you can give that bus a priority to go through the light. So it'll keep the light green long enough for the bus to go through or turn or whatever it needs to do. So that's called transit signal priority. But it also can make it safer when you talk about, I think I'm getting off topic, but for first responders. So first responders, they're responding, they're going at high speeds. People have to hear and react to them, and they could get hit by one of these vehicles. They could get hit by another first responder. But what we can do with connected vehicles is send out a message to say, hey, I'm a first responder. I'm coming up in this direction at this speed, yada, yada, yada. And then the vehicles will be able to tell, hey, I have an emergency vehicle approaching from behind or from ahead or from the left or from the right, and they can react accordingly. And then also the lights can go into that, and the emergency vehicle can request preemption, which is a little bit more than priority. So preemption is just that, they turn all the lights red, basically, and then the emergency vehicle can go through. So instead of relying on people to be able to see that there's an emergency vehicle coming from what direction, they'll be told, and it's very accurate. So it can make our first responders safer.
And when it comes to like a light being out, for instance, would it be able to send a signal that's like, this is signals not, we're not able to receive this signal? Like, would it be able to detect an error? And also like, because it's like a working relationship. You have a light that doesn't just help you out the whole entire time. You can actually, your car might actually be able to send a signal that could warn someone like, hey, this light is out, or there's this type of thing and this needs to be fixed. And then someone can go and fix it.
That's a good question. And I don't have the answer to that. I've never thought of that before, but it seems like we could do something in that. If we lose connectivity with the traffic signal controller, um, I do believe that we do get sort of traffic signal controller state of health. So maybe we can work something out with that.
Because when we were talking about trains a minute ago, I remember I almost got hit by a train because one of the train lights were out, and it wasn't like the thing didn't come down, nothing like that. So I was going, and this train was actually coming. I almost got hit by it, and it was like one of those like probably rare, obviously occurrences and stuff like that. They ended up fixing it later, but I mean, this stuff that can be avoided if your vehicle can detect it or hear it before. I couldn't hear it. I had my music playing or something like that. Same thing with first responders. More people have either a headphone in or they have music playing or they're in their own little world and they don't see the first responder car that's honking at them to tell them to get out of the way as well too.
Right. And I can't hear them. As the older I get, my hearing is getting worse. I can't tell what direction they're coming in, so I'm like, I think I hear one. And then I'm looking around, I can't see it, so I'm not real sure what to do.
I get nervous when they go to the red light and it's not red for them, or it is red, it's red for us or something, and then it's like somebody just coming across. But what do you think? Like when can this start being like implemented? Do you think like over the next year or so, or is there still a little bit of more work that needs to be done on it?
Well, there's a little bit of flux in the industry. It was ready to go. So initially we had something called dedicated short range communication. We had a dedicated band that we broadcast in that was allocated by the FCC. It was at 5.9 gigahertz, 75 megahertz band. So it had 7 channels. And then a few years ago, I'm going to say about 5 years ago, they started talking about, hey, I got something better. It's called cellular V2X. And then there was division within the industry. So you have to realize that for this to work, everyone needs to talk the same language, right? So GM has to talk to Ford, has to talk to Volvo, has to talk to everyone. So the industry standards, everyone needs to embrace and adopt. So CV2X changes the communication platform. So the data payload is the same. The message set is the same, but the way you hear it is different than DSRC. So they're not compatible. So that kind of stalled things in the industry because they're going, well, should I do CV2X or should I do DSRC? And they don't want to spend all this money to be the wrong one. So it's kind of like the Betamax fiasco. I shouldn't say fiasco, but the history of Betamax. Well, what if you bet on Betamax and it end up being the other one? So they're kind of saying, well, let's wait and see a little bit. So they waited and we're seeing, and then the FCC came out and said, well, you didn't deploy anything, so we're going to take your spectrum away. And they gave 40 megahertz of the spectrum to unlicensed users, aka Wi-Fi, and they left 35 megahertz. No, they gave 45, but they only left 30 megahertz for safety. And they said DSRC will be in the first 10, and then CV2X will be in the second 20 because they need a wider channel. Oh, by the way. And then they said, by the way, you have to have everything that you broadcast today in that spectrum, which we do in Ann Arbor, for DSRC and move it to channel 180. And then, and again, oh, by the way, within 2 years, you can't broadcast DSRC at all. So basically, the FCC decided that CV2X is the way to go. And so it actually introduced another delay in the industry because they were wondering, well, is this going to stick? A lot of people sued the FCC. And in fact, there was a case that was just heard this February. So they're wondering, well, do I embrace CV2X and just move forward, or do I stick with my investment that I already have in DSRC? So you have to think in Ann Arbor, we've spent $50 million already on DSRC. And this month, actually, we had to quit broadcasting because our suppliers didn't support the equipment anymore. And it wasn't straightforward to move from channel 172, which was in the bottom of the spectrum that they gave to the unlicensed users, to the new DSRC channel on 180. So we just had to turn all of our infrastructure off. Very sad day in Ann Arbor. very sad day for me personally because I've spent, 10 years working on it. But more importantly, it's delaying getting this technology out. And every year that we delay is more fatalities. It's more life-changing crashes. For instance, a few years ago, I got into a minor accident, relatively speaking, and it screwed up my knee. And I'm never going to be able to kneel again. I walk just fine, but I can't kneel. Well, it gets me on a lot of housework, which is good, but um, and it could have definitely been avoided with connected vehicle technology. And I'm still got, I guess, a form of PTSD because whenever I get into that situation, I'm very nervous on will I get into another accident. So my point is this: it is ready to go, but there's just turmoil in the industry because of introduction of CV to X and then what the FCC did. So hopefully that'll be resolved and then we can start deploying this and saving lives.
Is there just not enough understanding, I would say, from the bigger companies about what connected vehicles can do? It seems like the main priority for everybody is just autonomous vehicles, is just eliminating the human experience in general.
No, I don't think so at all. The partners that we work with are all major OEMs. They sit on all the committees, so they're very involved with it, and they do want to deploy it. It's just a matter of if we deploy it, is everyone going to get on board with it? Again, it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing, and I think that's where infrastructure comes in, and it helps resolve the chicken and the egg because it gets day one benefit for vehicles.
Now, if we talk about trying to maybe source out to an aviation company or, like you were saying before, trains, I mean, would that be an easier thing to show them that the technology does work and it is way more effective instead of just trying to hurry up and get it implemented into cars?
I'm not sure. I think that they and by they I'm thinking me the automobile manufacturers. I think they already understand it and they are ready to go. I think once this last lawsuit is finished, and in fact, I thought they were going to be announcing the verdict in June, and here it is, mid-July. We still haven't heard it, but I think once that gets announced, that we'll see more and more people, not people, OEMs being starting to deploy.
Now, it's a lot like what I've heard and what I've seen from your C-SPAN video. It's a lot like a radio frequency as well, too. So when we talk about the different channels in a radio frequency, would there be like specifics where there's certain levels that would be like maybe for government employees as well, too? If we talk about like first responders, if we talk about police enforcement as well.
Actually, no. What you do is get a little in the technical part of it, but each message has an ID, so it identifies it as I'm a traffic information message, I'm a signal phase and timing message, I'm a basic safety message, I'm a PSM, I'm a first responder. So that's kind of in the header of the message, so that the OBU can figure out what it is and what they need to do with it. So it doesn't need to be on a separate channel. Usually it's on a separate channel for things like bandwidth. Um, well, I'm going to stick with bandwidth because that's a big one. And we're not even sure that we can do everything we want to do on the one channel for CVDAX that the FCC has given us.
Now, when we talk about connected cars, is there a way that you can make a technology that people can just put on the cars that they have now as well too, or is that a whole system kind of difference?
No, in Ann Arbor, most of the vehicles that we equipped, so at the high point, we had over 2,800 vehicles equipped with the technology, and they were all aftermarket. So we would recruit people that lived and worked in Ann Arbor, and we'd put it on their vehicle. And it could have been any vehicle. The only thing we didn't do was convertibles. Um, but the other vehicles, we would install the device like in the trunk or under the seat, somewhere out of the way where it wasn't interfering with day-to-day use of the vehicle. And then they would get a DSRC antenna, which is the same thing actually as a CV to X antenna. It's a 5.9 gigahertz antenna and a GPS antenna, actually a GNSS antenna. So it gets more satellites than just our GPS ones. And so the GPS antenna was installed either on the deck lid, the trunk deck lid, or on the roof of the vehicle for SUVs and pickups. And then that was, snaked through into the interior to connect up with the DSRC device.
I got a really kind of out there question, but how could it take account for a deer?
That is a good question, and I don't think it can, unless it's connected up with some type of vision system that is in the environment. And so the vision system would definitely detect it. And then that would be sent to the vehicles. But it doesn't, connectivity per se can't detect that. It has to be some type of an external sensor that's connected.
Okay. When it comes to the vision system, could you explain a little bit about the vision system? Because I've talked to a couple people who've worked in like autonomous vehicles that talk about in a sense of using a kind of not really a virtual reality type system, which I don't know if it's the same exact thing when you talk about the vision system for a connected car. Could you go in a little into a little bit about that for me?
So I'm really talking about systems they have out today. The company I'm most familiar with is GridSmart, but there's a lot more. There's Atiris, Myovision, a few of them, but it's just a camera. The GridSmart camera happens to be a fisheye. So it's something that's commercially available today. A lot of cities use them. They use them for helping with congestion. So they're monitoring like how many vehicles are going through the intersection, and then they can adjust their timing plans for that intersection to maybe allow the one lane or the one side to have a green light a little longer, kind of thing. Um, but they're out in the field now, so it's just commercially available system, and the only difference is that system is then connected to a roadside unit, where that roadside unit can process. Actually, you use an edge computer, but that's a whole nother thing. So the edge will process, the position of whatever is being detected by the vision system, classify it as what it is, and then gives that information to be sent out. So in our case, we're doing the PSM, so the personal safety message, detecting pedestrians in a crosswalk. But you can use it for much more than that.
When we talk about saving gas, like kind of the rewards that kind of go with it, saving gas, cutting down on fatalities, reducing traffic, better flow of traffic as well too. What other capabilities does it have, or at least benefits to the user to adopt this type of connected car?
So that's the three big ones, but literally there are thousands of applications that you can do. So if you can think of it, it can be done. And it's just a matter of what the OEMs want to deploy. I don't work at an OEM, so I don't deploy. But that's the big three: is safety, mobility, and sustainability.
And how'd you get started just wanting to research connected cars?
So, my background's actually automotive. And I started my career back in 1987 at Ford Motor Company as an FCG. And all the Ford people listening will know what that is, but it's just a trainee. And I worked in transmission and engine kind of things. I left Ford, went to General Motors, still, working in engine transmission type of work. But I was never really passionate about my job. And then I got this opportunity to go to Visteon to work in safety, something I've never worked on before, but it was in advanced driver awareness systems. So that's kind of the prelude to autonomous vehicles, basically. And so I worked there, and I love that job. We started dabbling near the end of my tenure there. We started dabbling in this connected vehicle stuff. But unfortunately, Visteon was in bankruptcy, and they pretty much sold off all the IP from my department. And so it was me and one other guy. I started in a department of 36, and it went down to a department of 2. So I had this opportunity to work at Umtree, standing up safety pilot model deployment. And when they called me to do that, I said, "Yeah, count me in." And it's been kind of my passion ever since. Um, to work on something that I can say I'm saving lives.
Yeah, there's that, like I keep bringing back, is the human error aspect of things as well too. I mean, it's something that we've been trying to understand, especially when it comes to autonomous vehicles. That's why I've seen just a giant push for that. Just the capacity. I mean, there's just so many things you don't really take into account when you go and in actually drive your car. We just look at main factors like if a tree falls, which is still rare, but then we look at floods or we look at all these other things that kind of weather happens. But I mean, the immense amount of stuff, there's so many instances where I'll be at a stoplight or something and I'll look up in my rear view and somebody's texting on their phone and they're not slowing down. And you're just like, I'm going to have to move out of the way or this car is going to run right into the back of me. I mean, like I mentioned before, Route 90 in my town, there's at least 3 accidents a day on there. It's one small bridge to get over to an island. You have nowhere to go. You can't just go into the grass. There is no grass. You're over water. And it's these incidences where a lot of the accidents that happen are just people texting, people changing the radio, people doing very small stuff where you would think that this would be a giant, area that we would look at how to fix.
So my boss, Henry Liu, Dr. Henry Liu, he likes to say that, for a lot of these problems, AI can really help, but, we're talking about like complex problems, but the tail end, so the very rare occurrences, that's the part that needs to be worked on. That you can't really test for that because you don't know what it's going to be. And the autonomous vehicles can't learn it because they don't see it often enough, so they won't know what to do. And you do need humans in the loop now for that. But there is, when you bring in connectivity, that helps. When you bring in the connected infrastructure, that definitely helps. And that's, I think, between connectivity and smart infrastructure, that's really what's going to make connected and automated vehicles commercially viable. And it's for these instances that you're talking about.
And even when you talk about like temperature gauge in the road, where you're able to send a signal, be able to see the temperature just to predict this is the area where black ice would be, or this is the type of situation that would occur in this type of thing. And just having the car aware of that type of thing as well, too. I mean, people don't check the weather usually when they're, first thing in the morning when they go out of their house. Sometimes they do, depending if they got to sleep in, if it's their day off. But I go to work at 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I come across a whole host of hazards out there. Deer, come across it's nighttime. I drive an older car, so my headlights aren't exactly the best. I mean, these are all situations and things that would help if you had an autonomous vehicle or a connected vehicle, just to be able to predict, hey, it's raining out. I can't see 2 feet in front of my face, and I'm going 55 apparently. So that's something where you have to kind of take an account as well too. And I mean, you're lucky if you don't get into an accident. I mean, if you look at the number of accidents that happen compared to the number of the accidents that could happen, I mean, there's a large thing right there where we're talking about an area not only of speculation, but an area of just like multiple things can go wrong. It's not just one simple thing. So it's interesting that the fact that companies are going like in a different direction when it comes to the technology, where if we have the technology in one area right now to implement it right now, we should be going that way.
Well, I can't agree more. I think it should be deployed as soon as we can. And I do think that, the FCC really caused a big delay. And in fact, Dr. Jim Sayer wrote a paper a few years ago, I'm going to say 5 years ago, and he was talking about the delay that CV2X is causing in deploying connected vehicle technology and how many lives it was going to cost. And it was significant. And that paper was written 5 years ago. And at the time, they said CV2X is going to delay in implementation by 3 years, but it's been five. And that's mostly because of the FCC. So, every day we wait, there's just more deaths and life altering accidents every day.
Is that it's got to be a money issue? I mean, you get to think about the system that we're on right now. How hard would it to be to get everybody on board to change the current system to go to a newer method?
I don't really know the answer to that. Like I said, I'm not an OEM, so I don't know how they make their decisions. And again, it's if everyone doesn't, if not, if everyone doesn't do it, it doesn't provide the benefits that it's meant to. So it's very hard for the OEMs, I'm sure, to say, well, I'm going to be the first ones. And in fact, General Motors actually deployed DSRC in 2017, and they're still the only ones that have deployed it to date.
Mm. Have you speculated or talked about maybe the idea of inserting this technology not only into vehicles but into something else?
I'm very vehicle centric.
Okay,
So
that's fair. All right. Um, is there a place where anybody can find some of your links as well too?
sure, CCAT has a website, so ccat.umtree.umich.edu. It's a good place to start. Umtree has a website, so it's just umtree.umich.edu. And of course, there's MCity, so mcity.umich.edu.
And can you explain a little bit about I mentioned the city. I mentioned the city before. That's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
M City. Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So MCity it's a separate organization actually under the College of Engineering. So, UMTRE is also an organization under the College of Engineering. Mostly though, the College of Engineering is departments that are like degree granting organizations, and we are not. We don't grant degrees. MCity doesn't grant degrees, but we do research. Not that the college doesn't do research as well. They do a lot. But MCity in particular, um, it was sort of actually Dr. Jim Sayer had a lot to do with it. He did the design of it about 7 years ago, I'm pretty sure. Um, anyway, the MCity organization has leadership circle members and it has affiliate members, and the leadership circle members, they sit, it's pretty much like they sit on a board, they decide what research is going to be done, and they contribute financially to the organization significantly. Affiliates more are working with on a smaller scale on bringing technology into MCity, trying it out there. So typically it's not cash, but in kind, so equipment and technology. But the MCity facility is really sort of the highlight, and that is the first facility in the world that was developed and built to test connected and automated vehicles, transportation technologies. And it's been copied all over the place. So I guess the best compliment is being copied. There's K City in Korea. They couldn't even come up with something original with that, eh? So, but a lot of the universities are starting to develop their own facilities. So here's what it is. It's 32 acres, test track. It has everything that you'll encounter in the real world. So it has a small strip that simulates a highway. So it has on ramps and off ramps. It has an urban area that has facades that are movable. So they're right on the street for an urban area. They're farther away for a suburban type area. It has a train track. It has tunnels. It has a piece of it that simulates a tree canopy, which is important for connected and automated vehicles because GPS is everything, right? And so you lose your GPS signal when you go in the tunnel or under the tree canopy. And then there's two roundabouts. One you always see in the picture. It's the big one that has the block M on it, and that roundabout is actually has a lot going on. So it has pedestrian crossings, and then of course the entrance and exits. So it has a lot going on. But the facility itself, again, it doesn't have everything isn't pristine. So it has what you're going to encounter. It has stop signs that are faded, stop signs with graffiti. It has light traffic signals that are mounted on a pole, mounted on a guy wire, mounted on a mast arm. It has parallel parking. It has angled parking. It has 90-degree parking. It has fire hoses. It has bus stops. It has different pavement. So it has concrete, stamped concrete, blacktop. It has line markings that are nice and new, line markings that are dilapidated, different types of line markings with reflectivity materials. So basically it has everything that you're going to encounter in the real world. And so you go in there and you test connected and automated vehicles, infrastructure, enabling technologies. And then the beauty of it is you can drive out into Ann Arbor, which is a connected environment, and then you can test it in the real world. So it really is a thing of beauty.
When we talk about you mentioned like kind of has like a lot of noise. has simulations or has these aspects where there's like, trees can't go through a signal, or you can't get a signal through trees or under a tunnel, for instance. But if we go to like New York City and we have a connected vehicle, it has a lot of bells and whistles that are going on around it in situations where people are just crossing without necessarily using a crosswalk and not getting stopped for it. But that happens. We know those happen. You have cars that are kind of, I mean, people say it's kind of crazy to even have a car in New York City because of the traffic there. How does the system handle something like that, where there's just so much noise going on that it's hard to kind of drown it out and still be able to function?
So there's actually a connected vehicle deployment in Manhattan. And so there's a US DOT project called the CV pilots, and there's three of them, but one of them's in Manhattan. And so they have overcome what we call an urban canyon. So your GPS signal, like when you're trying to find your way on a map and you're not getting a good GPS signal and it can't figure out where you are, right? And so it's just kind of either telling you somewhere you're not or just can't figure it out at all.
Or it's like I disappeared and it doesn't show me.
Yeah, yeah. So they've installed some additional equipment, which I am not an expert on, but I know a guy, Bob Roush. So shout out to Bob. And so they have installed additional equipment to help with getting your GPS location. And it's almost like I'm going to say a repeater, that we use in testing. So GPS repeater, where you bring it indoors. It's kind of like that, but way more sophisticated. So I would definitely look that up. The CV Pilots program in Manhattan. So New York City, I think they call it CV Pilot New York City.
I'll definitely check it out. I appreciate you giving me your time to talk on the show about this. I didn't realize how complex it was, and so you started going into it a little bit, but it's definitely new technology. And I mean, when you first started getting into automation, or you first started just getting into automotive in general, I mean, did you ever think that we would even be talking about the idea of autonomous vehicles, and then somehow that's become more normalized, and now you're seeing technology be implemented into, we have smart cars. I think there was just a branding thing. It was supposed to be eco-friendly, but now we're actually talking about smart vehicles that are able to kind of read and interpret information based on certain signals that are being sent to it. And I'm like, man, 2050 for autonomous vehicles. I mean, it'll probably be sooner than that at the rate that we're going. I mean, there's this whole thing expanding out now, especially with the era of electric vehicles coming in as well, too.
Yeah, no, I'm old, I'm not gonna lie. So when I started out, it was all about fuel economy and I worked in engine. So that's kind of what we talked about most of the day. And we weren't talking about automated vehicles. So I'm glad to see that we're here. And I think the next step for all of us in general is seeing where connected vehicles, automated vehicles, and electric vehicles meet on the road.
Yeah, having like a combination of them. Yeah, I'm old at heart, I would say. Uh, when it comes to new technology, I'm very slow to embracing it, but I like the idea of where it's going. But Deborah, seriously, it's been a pleasure being able to chat with you on my show. I'm going to link all your links in the description. Is there any shout outs you want to do? Do you have a Twitter?
We do. CCAT has Twitter, LinkedIn. So yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure I link those in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting, and thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.